Hi, Quinn. How are you?
I'm doing great, Lynette.
Awesome. Hey, listen, before we dive into our podcast together, our interview podcast, what I'd like to do is just ask you four questions. The first question being, share the best part of your entrepreneurial journey.
Oh, it's an adventure. It's a fun adventure. You've got your highs, your lows, it's like a roller coaster sometimes. But I've been an entrepreneur actually since I've been about 16. I had my first business at 16. So,
What was that business?
well, I was a baton twirler and I opened a little baton school.
Are you kidding? That is awesome. You never told me this in the
Yeah, I know.
pre-call.
I forgot about that.
So you are an entrepreneur by heart.
I am, yes.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love
through
the
and
freedom
through.
of it, yes.
And I was just going to ask you, so the best part really is that you've got this flexibility and the freedom. So what type of freedom does it give you?
Well, I'm creative. I love coming up with ideas. I can read a book and ideas start popping and how I'm going to move that into a certain area or develop my programs a certain way, or if I'm writing or giving a talk, it just inspires me. So nothing is as it is. It is always evolving in my brain. It seems like.
I love that. I love that. There's nothing like getting on an airplane with about three magazines and being inspired by every single one of them and then going and into implementing the ideas. I get my best ideas from airplane rides, actually. So that's awesome. That's great. Second question, what advice do you have for hesitant women in midlife who are considering entrepreneurship?
Well, I have two ideas. One is follow your heart. So important. If it feels right and you feel excited about it, go for it. As soon as you feel the self doubt, so that personal thinking mind that comes on board, don't follow that part. Always follow the one that inspires you and feels good on the inside. And the second idea I have is think about yourself at 80 years old. You're sitting on your rocking chair, you're nearing the end of life. When you look back, when you're the age you are now, what do you want her to know? What
Mhm.
do you want her to know about this journey in the next 30 years? And so listen to her wisdom because she knows what you want to do.
That's awesome. I love that. Follow your heart. And then, especially that fearful part. Like, I feel like that is where we get stuck. Like, one of the questions I want to ask you when we get into the podcast is when you're saying that you're creative and you find inspiration in a lot of things that you're reading or even you're seeing, is like, how do you move away from that fearful part? So hang on to that because I want to talk to you more about that.
For sure.
All right, third question. What inspired you to start your business? But I guess in your case, what inspired you to always be an entrepreneur starting at 16?
I just enjoy it. There's a joy that comes with creating and seeing it being put into action. So I used to do fashion shows, and so I was the choreographer, and I just love the idea of pulling something together and implementing it. And so that's always been part of me. And I also have had jobs where it was 9 to 5, and I felt so drained after the day and after the week. So it just wasn't part of who I am. And so that's why I got on this path. And my work has always been about beauty and well being in girls and then now women. And I just want everyone to live a beautiful life. And it's just followed me ever since.
I love that. And tell me a little bit more about when you were in your 9 to 5 and coming home feeling drained.
Mm.
Why do you think you were like that?
Oh, the metaphor that keeps coming to mind when I think about working 9 to 5 is a caged animal.
Oh my God.
I just felt that I didn't have the ability to really express my work the way I want to work, how I know I can reach people, because I had to fit into a protocol. I had to fit into a box of the mandate that was being delivered at that particular organization.
And so when you knew that that was like how did you have that self-reflection? Like how did you know that being drained at the end of the day was because you were this in a cage versus just, oh, you were busy at work and you were just, pumping it out, How did you know that it
Mhm.
was really going against your values, I guess?
Well, that's kind of what I teach in my courses is really understanding your wisdom is always speaking to you. Like it is
Hmm.
always letting you know what's right for your life. And it has a tendency to be a whisper. So when we get too busy minded, we don't hear it. And we just prog along, or we blame other people, or we blame the organization, or we have our things. But that is your clue that something is off within yourself. And you have to realign yourself to what makes sense to you. So anytime you start thinking about something different, what's the feeling like? And how does that, even though there's fear there, it still feels solid and grounded. And that's the key when you pay attention to that.
I love that. I just wrote that down. I want to talk to you more about that. Just knowing, like, what are you thinking, feeling, and doing, and like just having that sense of being present in your body to know well enough that it wasn't just because you had stacks of work to do, it was because it just wasn't serving you.
Mm.
And yeah, that's amazing. Okay, one last thing, and I think I already know the answer, but this is going to be a goodie. How has entrepreneurship, how has living this life of an entrepreneur really changed your life, impacted your overall well-being? Like how has it really impacted you?
Hmm. Well, nothing can impact my well being in the outside world, but I can align my outside world with my well being. And so when I pay attention to my well being and I know what brings it joy, then I align my outside life to it.
Mhm. I love it. Well, thank you for being so honest with those 4 questions. Let's do a dive into This is 50 Freedom Through Passion. So, Quinn, you and I, welcome to the show. You and I met through a mutual friend based in Vancouver, Paige. She's been wonderful. She's
Mm.
given me, I think, 3 or 4 really amazing referrals. So, when I had an opportunity to meet with you and talk with you, you were doing what a lot of women our age are probably doing, and that was taking care of a sick mom, being an entrepreneur, or just hustling, with your life. And I just admired everything. That whole conversation was amazing. So give
Oh, good.
yourself a
Thank
little
you.
bit of a yeah.
And I was in the middle of mom, coughing and yeah, so
It
appreciate that.
was it was really amazing to watch. So let's take a step back. Give the audience a little bit of a lowdown on who you are, where your journey has taken you to today, a little bit about what you're doing right now, and then we'll dive into some questions that I have for you.
Yeah, wow. Well, right now I'm at the end of my 50s, so it feels interesting to be at this end. I couldn't wait to be 50. I was like, I had a fancy dress swim for my 50th birthday, and I raised money for women where in Africa where they needed nets, to protect their children. So I joined an organization that was doing that, and we just wore our fancy dresses. That I had a pink runway that took us into the water, and I thought, oh, what am I going to do for my 60s? I have to top that somehow. So, so that was my entry into the 50s. But prior to that, my work has been very interesting. Like I mentioned before, I always loved beauty. I've always been, my first runway show was when I was 5, and then I just stayed, when I was on stage since I was 5 as well with baton twirling, that just sort of evolved into wanting to be in that industry. And so I spent about 10 years in the beauty industry and did all kinds of things from training European skincare lines in Western Canada to owning my own aesthetic studio, training in Beverly Hills. So I just had a lot of
Wow.
fun in the field. But something was missing for me because I was doing self development courses for girls. And a lot of them were asking me about relationships. And I had my own personal thinking about relationships, but I felt I needed more training. So I still remember that day where I gave back the keys to the company I was working with, got in the car and went to school and registered for a counseling program. And I've never looked back on that, um, doing that.
So, what was the draw? How were they coming to you to ask these questions, these girl questions?
Yeah, I was going into rec centers. I was promoting my programs through rec centers at the time. Sometimes I was going into the school system and doing some courses there. Sometimes it was a rite of passage type celebration. It was just a lot of networking and making contacts with people.
Wow, that's great. That's great. So, okay, so then that was, so counseling sort of took hold in your mid 30s?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just before my third, yeah, around my 30s. And then I had my babies, and I
Okay.
had two daughters. And as much as I wanted to work, I really loved being a mom.
Right.
I loved it. And when I was away from them for too long, it bothered me. I didn't know what was going on in their lives. And the nanny felt like they knew more than I did, and I didn't like that.
Mm.
And so I I really was hands-on as a mom and really nurturing that well-being in them, making sure they had their own voice at a very young age. I still remember my daughter in kindergarten, her teacher kept using the word stupid in class. And we don't use it in her home, and so she was beside herself that this teacher was saying stupid, calling kids stupid, and so she wanted me to talk to the teacher. And I said, well, you need to come with me and you need to let her know what you feel. Her first step into using her voice. And I was a little nervous, but I let her take the lead and tell the teacher what was on her mind. And
Yeah.
so, you use the word stupid and it's not very nice. And it was, and the teacher asked, well, how do I use it? And I went, oh dear, here we go. And she
Yeah.
says, well, you call yourself stupid, and that's not very kind to
Oh,
yourself. I thought, oh, so it was the best intro for me to see how important it was to guide my daughters through their schooling years, making sure their voices were always intact.
hmm.
And then I went through a very difficult divorce and a death, my father's passing, and then a very dear aunt. And then I went back to school and got my master's at that time. But again, it was all focused on their well-being first. I really did that, and
Hmm.
that's where I really suffered. My health went down quite a bit at that time, so it was really interesting for me to observe. We have to put the oxygen mask on first
Yeah.
before we help other people, and so I wasn't putting on my mask as much as I needed to.
Okay. We got a lot of unpacking to do.
Okay.
So, first question for you is, you said you could hardly wait to turn 50. Why?
My 40s, well, can I use the word hell?
Yeah, say it.
Yeah, it was hell. So when I was 42, I think 42, 43, I got very sick. I was bedridden for about 3 weeks. And through multiple tests, they found a calcification in my brain. So they weren't sure if it was a tumor. So I went through 3 years of MRIs twice a year. My kids were 3 and 5. I was exhausted, like depleted. I could sometimes I couldn't move very far. I had to lay down. That's how exhausted I was at the beginning of my 40s. And then at the end of the 40s was the separation.
Okay. So have you healed during that time in your 40s, the brain calcification?
Well, the surgeon basically said, as far as we know, it's a beauty mark. And I'm going, okay, I'll keep that. So
Okay.
I have a
I'll
beauty
hang
mark
on
in
to
my
that. There
brain.
you go. Hang on to that. Hang on to that. That's actually a really, I love that. That's a really
You do
positive
it.
way of
That's
saying it,
right.
I guess.
Yeah.
And then your marriage ended. So that was sort of like, okay, I'm just gonna, I can hardly wait to leave this decade
Oh,
behind. I'm gonna
yes.
focus on being 50. And so when you thought about that, so you had a life event, which I think a lot of people in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, we all end up having an event of some sort that makes us kind of think about life a little bit differently. In your
Mm.
case, it was both a health scare as well as an end of marriage. So when you entered into your 50s, you were at a point where you thought to yourself, how am I going to make this different? And so what did you say to yourself where you first of all, you had the dress party where you all jumped into a pool or a river? Was it
The ocean.
the ocean? Okay, perfect. So I guess that was sort of symbolic of how you wanted to live your 50s, was to have this celebration with all of your friends, do something wild and crazy that you would not normally do. But what did you vision for yourself in your 50s?
Well, I was still, as a single mom, was children were living with me full time. And so that was, it was still intense at the beginning of my 50s for sure, because I was still in mother mode and moving them into their young 20s now. And they're independent, they're confident, they're resilient. So that to me was a really important to finish that off in my 50s for sure.
Hmm.
And I had a vision. I thought I'd be working for an organization that worked with single moms, and the door appeared. And so I walked through it. And so
Really?
I started working with single moms in small groups. And then I ended up working with women survivors of violence and abuse and helping them get back into the workforce.
Okay, that's great. So when you're in your 50s, um, you said your health suffered and that's when you sort of had this realization that, as you put it, I needed to start putting my own oxygen mask on first.
Mm,
Honestly, I could probably tell you that 98 point or 99.9% of the women that I know that have raised kids have done this exact same thing. We
mm,
always put them first. Um, I mean, I guess there are probably cases where that doesn't happen for sure, but I think we give more than we anticipate getting anything back. And I think that's just the way we are as mothers. But how can we make that pivot? Because here's what happens. We get into our 50s. I mean, you had your children a little bit later, so it took your 50s or at least half of your 50s to have your girls as independent women, off to university. But how do we how do we make that pivot? Because it gets even harder once they've left the nest. And, maybe they're not answering your phone calls like they used to when they lived at home, or, they have their own lives now. And, mom, I don't really need you to be part of my life anymore. And you're sitting there going, well, but hold on a second. I gave my whole life to you. And how do I now take and turn it around to start thinking, yes, I do need to put my own oxygen mask on. And it's a hard thing. I'd love to hear how you've been able to do something like that.
Well, the idea of freedom comes back again. So when my youngest left home, I felt freedom. I was able to do whatever and whenever, and I didn't have to think about somebody else. So from that angle, as a individual, as a woman, I was excited about that idea. As a mom, I know that I'm just at another level of relationship with them. So when our kids are born, they're there and we're trying to figure it out. And then they grow and then we figure it out. And then they grow again, we figure it out. I don't think that ever ends in our lifetime as a mother. We're always, I mean, I even think of my 92-year-old mother. My one daughter had some health issues and she has dementia. But when it comes to her worrying about her family, She is crystal clear. And
Really?
oh, absolutely. How's she doing? You know, are things okay? And so she's able to stay focused. So I think that's an innate in us as moms, that we're always concerned. And if we can just see the stage in their development as they're just in another stage of life, and I need to figure out how to be in relationship with that. I
Yeah.
know I still have to plant seeds of wisdom
Yeah.
around their health and relationships and things like that. So, but I have to do it differently now because they are more independent. They have more of a voice. They have some opinions that are different than mine. And so how to, it's an ebb and flow in that relationship, but at the core of it is love. And there is nothing that will impact our relationship because that's solid. Knowing that love is the foundation to our relationship, which is really key. It helps when it gets disconnected, that that that's there. So there's a trust in that relationship, that it will always flow even though you're ebbing at the moment. So one time, this is a cute kind of story from when they were in high school. My one daughter was very quiet. She never expressed herself and what her concerns were. And so I always wanted her to let it out, like just
Yeah.
let it out, because, I want your voice. So I went to pick her up at school one day and I asked her, instead of me always going right to the school, why don't you start walking and then we'll meet somewhere? So I flew by her. She like 3 blocks. I flew by her and she called me, Mom, what are you doing? You just went by me. So I turned around, picked her up, and she was still mad. She was so mad. And I sat there and going, yes, she's getting angry. This is so great.
Yeah.
It was so good to hear her voice because she was telling me her truth. She was letting me know what her truth was. And she was mad at me for making her walk and not seeing her on the way.
Yeah.
So, but now that they're in their 20s, they're that anger or, you know, not liking my opinion is met with a lot more defensive anger or upset or judgment. And so it's like, oh, that's different for me. And so it's like, okay, how do I maneuver that? It's like I'm glad she has an opinion and it's really important that she does, but how informed is it? So I'm at this stage of we need to teach our daughters how to critical think because we are bombarded with so much information that how do you decipher what's important to you? And I mean, we go through that as parents. Someone
Hmm.
says, well, try this or try that or do this. And we have to quiet our minds enough to really tap into the wisdom of what do I think is best for my child in this moment, and give it a try.
Hmm.
And so it's always really important to be able to figure out how to do that. And I'm still maneuvering those waters of, you know, my kids being in their 20s and how to stay connected enough with them, but also give them their freedom. And I feel like I'm in that same boat. I want my freedom too, so it's
Right.
it's it's just that dance that we're in, stage of life. Like, will it be different when they marry or when they have children, if they choose to do that? So I think every stage of our children's lives is a new opportunity for us to grow within ourselves, because regardless of what our children do, I can have well-being and I can have calm within myself regardless. And that's an important way to role model to our daughters how to be amazing at 50.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So there's a couple of questions I want to ask. So when you have been your entrepreneur along the way, how has I guess, how has your mindset shifted? Like you talk about ebb and flowing with your kids. How has, as you've gotten older, as you've gotten even wiser, specifically in your counseling work, how has your advice changed? Like, are you adapting to sort of this societal norms today versus societal norms from 15, 20 years ago? Because I think, in my opinion, things are much more, obviously, with social media and stuff, much more authentic and raw, and we're seeing more and we're exposed to more. How have you adapted your business?
So my work has always been based on understanding how the mind creates the human experience. So the only way I can share that with others is doing that myself. And so even mindset to me is is not infinite of possibilities. So I go above, so I go beyond mindset, if you will, and
Hmm.
be mind, like be that ability to be able to expand your thinking. And so when I get stuck, when I get into, modes of fear, as you had mentioned earlier about putting myself out there, I know that it's all thought. It's thought created. So I don't have to give it any more power than I am in my thinking mind. And I know it'll pass because it always passes. So fear to me is thought created.
Hmm.
So knowing that I don't have to be bothered by it. And I know I can just let it pass. And so wisdom will speak to me, time to go for a walk in the woods, time to take a hot bath, time to call a girlfriend and just dump,
Hmm.
So I don't teach techniques or strategies either because my wisdom knows what's best for me. I might
Hmm.
plant some ideas, different ideas, and my morning practices are always changing because one day I might want to do breath work and other days I want to do some writing. And so I trust my inner knowing to guide me for the day.
And I think that has a lot to do with how you're saying you've learned to put your own oxygen mask on first. Like, for you to be able to get to a point where you don't even think of it as a mindset anymore, you are just thinking of it as fear is creating those thoughts. They are not, I paraphrase, they are not reality. They are your own made up gremlin talking to you. And knowing that you're not going to accept that anymore. I mean, I think if I could just unpack it into the most simplest way, I think about the term Sunday scaries, where people on Sundays start to get a little anxious, a little, whatever, maybe they've had a big weekend and Sunday comes along and they sort of go into this state of Sunday scaries, and they, can start to get a little anxious about the week ahead. And so to be able to maybe think, well, hold on a second, that's just your gremlin in your brain, your fear in your brain, or whatever it is that's talking to you, then you can simply sort of put it in its place and continue to move on, but then bring in practices that help you, which is, as you were saying, whether it's journaling, breath work, going for a walk, calling a girlfriend, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's the doing part, right? I think you mentioned thought, feeling, behavior, and so that's the behavior part. And that I don't work at that level. I work beyond thought because thought is a power source that creates my experience in every moment. And so even though I might be anxious about Monday, I also don't have to be. And so when
Right.
I start learning how to get more in alignment with who I am, those gremlins don't talk to me. So if I'm off track and I decide to go do something and I naturally come back online, that's that ebb and flow that we have in our natural system to allow us to come back to a nice feeling.
I guess
But
that's your sign then when you are feeling where you're out of alignment. It could be anything that's happening. And because I'm normally this way in total alignment, I don't have gremlins talking to me anymore. But maybe that gremlin did talk to me that day. Then that's your immediate response is you're out of alignment. And what are the steps you need to take to get back on track?
Well, and gremlins are a gift as well. And a lot of times we look at our emotions that are anxious or anger or depression or whatever as they're horrible, they're bad. That's a fixed mindset. And it's like, okay, well, what's it telling me? What does it want me to know? How can I be in relationship with my anger so I can understand it instead of blaming everyone else because you did this, I'm angry. And I'm going, okay, woo, I really reacted to that. Like, what's that about? So when we start responding to life, we stay in alignment. Because when I respond to life, I don't need to be bothered by it. It's like, oh, there it comes. Even
Hmm.
when I was going through divorce, I mean, I know I was in the drama triangle for quite some time in it because it was easy to blame. And then I could start to notice that, wow, I'm really reacting and I want to respond. How can I
Hmm.
go into a response state? And that really made a difference in the dynamics, how I showed up to a conversation, and made a big difference in how I
How
moved
did you
forward.
how did you know that you needed to pivot from a react to a response situation?
Because we all have a state of mind. And so the way I best, oh, there's two ways I describe it, but a good one for adults is because I work with kids so much on this,
Hmm.
is being
But
in the
sometimes we need those simple messages, you know?
absolutely, yes. I'm really good with metaphors because our psychology is so abstract. Like, how do
Hmm.
you understand it? And so, being in the basement of your mind is dark, it's gloomy. You get out, you don't know where you're going. It could be very difficult to live there because everything is an argument, everything is a struggle. If I'm in the penthouse of my life, and in my mindset, it's like, wow, look at the possibilities out there. Look at where I could go, things I hadn't seen before, things that are still there that really make sense to me. So we are either in the penthouse, we could be on fifth floor, or we could be in the basement. And I could be in one conversation and be in the basement and then in the penthouse.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So when I start seeing that, it's like, oh, this is really cool.
And so you've just naturally been able to train yourself now to respond to situations from a penthouse view versus the basement view. Really, I love the metaphor. It's excellent.
Well, sometimes I am stuck in the basement for sure. I mean, I think as
Hmm.
human beings, we have old belief systems, we have old habits and patterns that get stuck in the left brain, and we they're there. When I recognize that, it's like, okay, what do I need to do? Sometimes I need to set a boundary. Sometimes I need to walk away. Sometimes, I can't give you an answer right now. Let me think about that. So I give myself permission and grace when I'm in a situation like that where I am in the basement. I have to I have to nurture my well-being in this moment. And this is the best I can do. So if someone's yelling at me and I'm dropping because I can't hold my grounding, it's like, I can't listen to you right now. And I'm sorry. I just, when you're
Yeah,
yelling at me, I can't listen. So if you could change that, that would be great. And if not, then we have to come back to this another time.
yeah. No, that's great. That's great. As I, in the modern day age today, it's all about setting boundaries. But it's really sort of sticking to values, right? The way that you feel that you should be treated and stuff. That's excellent. I want to go back to something you said about how we speak to ourselves. And I really loved what you were saying there. And I'd love to hear more about the impacts that it has. We may not even know we're speaking because sometimes we're not even speaking out loud. We just tell stories in our head. So give me a little bit more about that. Like expand on that a little bit and why it's important to, give ourselves grace.
Well, research has shown that we have 60,000 thoughts that go through our head every day.
Wow.
And I'm sure those that are more busy-minded. It's probably more. They also did a test on a Buddhist monk in meditation, and he was down to 10,000 thoughts. So you could see how much flows through our brain. And yet
Mhm.
we have this ability to drop in to another layer of who we are. So superficial layer, I am outside in. Like I am looking at everything is impacting me and who I am and how I'm showing up that day. Next layer could be my trauma responses. So if I've had a trauma in my life, I'm triggered by somebody yelling, for an example. Say I was had a trauma where somebody was always yelling at me. Now it's locked into my system. And then as soon as someone does that, I get triggered. And then I think it's them, but really, I've allowed it to stay stuck in my system. I didn't move the energy out. And I'm not taking full responsibility for how I feel. When I start fully understanding fully understand my emotional state is thought created, I drop in a little bit more. And it gets really quiet when we start to drop in. So when we're able to do that, we're able to shift in an instant. We come back to present moment because most of the time triggers are from the past. So my thinking mind goes into the past. I drop into insecurity. I pull out those files, and then I have
Yeah.
my little behavior thing. Or I go into my imagination, and that's more fear based. I don't know what's coming next. I'm terrified of the unknown, and yet the unknown can be so beautiful because it could be a surprise. And wow, like isn't that amazing? I mean, think of children in the forest and they see something for the first time. It's like, wow, that's so
Wow.
yeah. So if we can come to life that way, it's just a playground.
I love that. And so I, I don't know if I should even say this on this podcast, but I'm going to anyway. I have had, and I'm not asking you to like, I'm going to tell you about a dream. I'm not asking you to like dissect my dream here, psychologist. But I have had a dream for the last 15 years. It's the same dream. And I had it last night, and it's because I know that I'm about to launch my version 2.0 of my program. I'm struggling with like, oh my God, fear, right? In my head, I'm like, what happens if nobody signs up? What happens if, it's going to be just like, ah. And so I've had this dream that I'm going to an airport and I'm either I can't figure out how to get to the airport, or I've forgotten my luggage and somehow I'm struggling with like how to go and get my luggage. But last night's dream was one that I've had at least 3 times now, and it's almost the exact same airport, everything. And I cannot find the gate to the dream to the plane, and I talked to the agent, and it's just right there, it's just right there, and she's pointing in my dream to gate B, and I walk up this ramp but I still can't find the gate, and I wake up, and I can tell you I've literally had that dream for sure, that specific dream 3 or 4 times, but I dream about that like 5, 15 years now, like, and I probably have it once a year or something. It's just really weird. But when you were talking about getting to this place and moving away from fear, it just reminded me of my dream, because I feel like, I don't know, I feel like that's like, I don't know, I just feel like that's maybe it's the unknown, but maybe I need to act more like I'm entering into a force with this, version 2.0 of my program, and being excited about it and seeing what happens, and but instead I'm like, oh, what am I going to write on this sales page? And so I guess this is like when somebody listens to this podcast, they'll get the inside scoop on it happens to the best of us kind of thing. So
Absolutely. Oh, for sure. And
yeah.
again, the grounding is so important. Being able, I call it inner lifestyle, because we are everything we do on the outside of us, if it's our hair and makeup and the way we dress or the programs we put out there, that's for everyone to see, but they don't see the inner life. And when the inner life is in alignment with the outer life, everything flows, and it's all natural. It's You could get really curious about that dream and every part, even the lady at the gate. It's like, what part of her is me?
Hmm.
That part of me is giving me directions, and I know how to
Yeah,
show people how to do that. So it's everybody's so different, and dreams are amazing because they really do speak to us, and about our subconscious life, for sure.
absolutely. And all the things that we're picking up, you said that, on average we have 60,000 thoughts a day. I mean, just imagine like all like it's coming from everything that we look at. Like we look over there, we don't even know we're thinking about something like that. So yeah, that's interesting. Um, so just speaking to ourselves, I think that I really like that. I feel like just, what you said about getting just really curious about life and just being gentle and giving yourself grace and finding those moments of understanding when you're balanced and in alignment. Um, the one thing you said to me that I want to kind of hone into is when you're growing and you're evolving in your business. One thing you said to me was that you're super passionate about helping mothers with daughters.
Mhm.
And in our pre-call, you talked a lot about how really it's usually the mother that wants to fix the daughter, but you're from a point of view of, well, mom, you need to fix yourself. And it reminded it's being prompted from what you said. Like, think about your 80-year-old self and what she wants to say to you now. Like, keep going, because when you're here in your 80s, this is what life is going to be look like. And you could either leave boxes or you could leave a legacy.
Mhm.
Talk to us a little bit about the work that you do specifically with daughters and mothers, because it is definitely a crazy roller coaster ride. I have one daughter, she's 26, and it's been a roller coaster, but we've landed in quite a nice place. So,
Nice. Yeah. When I think of my mom, when she was raising four children, she took care of herself. I remember her getting her hair done. She worked full time. She was always there for us kids. She took her baths. She enjoyed a social life with my dad. So she role modeled how to take care of yourself and stay busy. Like, she was a volunteer. I mean, she had a full life and she loved it. And so when I was raising my kids, I knew that it's not so much what we say, it's what we role model. So one of my programs was going into elementary schools to deal with eating disorders. And we got talking about fats and how important fats is for growing bodies. And we don't get fat food in our house. We get zero fat. Mom brings in fat-free yogurt, for an
yeah.
example. It's like, wow. So those subtle things we role model to our kids. We're role modeling how to deal with conflict, how to deal with stress. So as much as you want to say one thing, they're going to pick up what you do and how
Hmm.
you live. And so it's really important for us to live our lives in the best way possible. It's okay if you're feeling stuck. Just say it. It's okay.
Hmm.
We have this thinking that we can't say, I messed up and I'm really sorry. It's okay to say that. That then connects us heart to heart. And we forget about those moments to just be heart to heart with our kids. And it has to start with that heart in ourselves feeling full because of who I am. Just loving who I am. Yeah, am I where I'm wanting to be? No, not yet. But that's part of the journey of life, isn't it?
It is. And it's interesting you said that. I'm not yet where I am at in life. And do you think, what would you say the percentage of people, I know this maybe might be a tough question, but the percentage of people out there, women, that have said that in their 50s?
Well, my understanding of women in their 50s when they became empty nesters, where they were devastated. It's like, what's my life about now? I mean,
Hmm.
my mom was like that. She loved family and we were all gone, and she, I think she went into a depression for a while because that was her identity, was us kids. And even though she loved what we were doing and was able to share that with her friends, it was that one-to-one connection with her kids that was struggling. So again, that's an outside in way of looking at life, because when we live what I call inside out, my resonance of love is so full in me, it doesn't need outside influences to make it any better.
Hmm. I think that's interesting. And I think that I would have hated to be my mother, to be honest, like, because I know that happened, right? She became an empty nester. Then she just worked out the rest of her, 10 years to hit retirement. And there was a moment where I saw my mom just kind of, I don't know if the word is give up, but comply to conform, whatever. I know that as I've talked to her about some stories of her childhood, and even as being a young mom, she lived in different times. Like, she got fired because she was pregnant, and I just learned that. And I was like shocked to learn that. And and as she put it, it was a great job. I was going to be able to travel to California and da da da. But then because I was so sick, um, they said, hey, listen, maybe you just need to go home and take care of your baby, and but I think women our age in this day and age, even though we did grow up with very much societal norms, and conformities, I guess, I think we're changing. And I think that we're starting to realize that in our 50s, we are going to go after that freedom. We are going to go after and put that safety mask on. And it might be a little bit of a shocker for our kids to see that, because they're so used to seeing, well, in my case, I was a mom hustler. I looked after two kids, raised them from little to like 17 years, 100%. And I even remember my daughter saying to me even a year ago when I started this life of freedom, wow, mom, it feels like you're living your 20s again. And I laughed, and I actually said, yeah, I am, because I didn't get to do a lot of those things that I wanted to do. And no fault of anybody's, but it is like I didn't put my oxygen mask on first, ever. And I think maybe the story you tell of your mom raising you and your siblings, she still took her bath. She still went out and had a social life with her husband. Whereas I think now we're seeing more single moms, and they're not able to do a lot of that. And then I think there's guilt behind it too. But I think women in their 50s and 60s are changing the norms, and I'm really proud of every one of them that does. So yeah, it's really really interesting. So tell us, where can we find you, Gwen? Where, if somebody was going to look to get some advice from Gwen, where would they find you?
Well, they can come to my website. So that's quinncashion.com. And I'm about to launch quiet luxury retreats. And so that I'll have a link to that as well. Because, sorry,
Tell
go
us a
ahead.
little bit about Quiet Luxury Retreats.
So my sister came to visit me in May, and her hands are full. Her husband had a stroke. She's taking care of my mom in Edmonton, and so her life is busy. And she's a grandmother, and she loves being a grandmother to three kids, and so her life's full. Again, her oxygen mask is not being put on, so she
Yeah.
came out to visit for a week. And I didn't let her do anything. Like, it's like, can I help? It's like, no,
Yeah.
go for a walk, read a book, do something that you enjoy. And it really replenished her. And then shortly after that, I wanted to do a trip on my own, so a solo trip, in my 50s, I out of the country, and so that was a big step for me. So I decided to go to Malibu.
Okay.
And there was a monastery there that I stayed at, and that's one of the things that I love is monasteries. They're just so peaceful. Quiet luxury is a term used in fashion right now. I see quiet luxury for well being because when we really understand how to tap into it, it is truly a quiet luxury. It's timeless, it's rich, it's beautiful space. And so when I was there, it occurred to me, I've got to do that. So I'm planning my first retreat in spring of next year.
And where will it be?
It will be in Malibu.
Okay, well, you better make sure I'm on that email list. So I go to your website and sign up to the email list. Is that what I'm doing?
I'm just about to launch it, so give me a few weeks.
Okay, well, by the time this podcast
That's
launches,
right.
Gwen, we will be able to put the link to that as well. We can promote that a little bit as well. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I love the idea of a monastery as well. I have a Tuesday mastermind group where one of the women in the mastermind group actually went and lived in a monastery for 2 months, I think it was. Um, and I just sounded so intriguing, and it just seems like that's being served up onto my path. I've been meeting quite a few now. That you're I think the third or fourth person I've met that's talked to me about monasteries. So very good. Maybe
Well,
this is a message.
yeah, my aunt was a nun, a sister of Saint Anne, and so she was in Victoria. So I went over a lot with my two daughters, and it was, you know, religions for some people has we have a lot of thinking around it, because
Sure.
sometimes they're not all done some great things over the years. But again, the foundation of religion is love. And so going to see the sisters, you just felt it in their space. It was just pure love. They loved my daughters. And so my kids grew up with the sisters. And so it's just been part of my life for quite some time. And so when she passed away, I found another community that I just love our conversations. They're so deep and rich and quite beautiful.
Okay, so that's going to be next spring, did you say?
Great. Yes.
Next spring. Okay, cool. All right, well, we're going to watch for it. Maybe we even have to bring you back on to talk specifically about it for more information. So,
Thank you.
Quinn, thank you very much. We've had a little bit of a bumpy recording session here, but we made it to the end. Thank you so much. I loved your story. I love how calm you are. In our pre-call, as I mentioned, the way that you had taken care of your mother while we were doing this pre-interview was just handled with absolute mastery. It was amazing. So I can tell you're an amazing woman inside and out. So
Thank
thank you.